Before turkey ever became the centerpiece of our national feast. Before stuffing, pumpkin pie, and cranberry sauce settled into their familiar places on the modern table. Thanksgiving morning in America looked very different. In the centuries before televised parades and crowded kitchens, families woke to cold November air, crackling hearth fires, and the smell of humble breakfasts that reflected who we once were. Farmers, pioneers, immigrants, and indigenous peoples. These early morning meals weren't elaborate spreads or overstuffed buffets. They were practical, comforting, and deeply tied to the land. They tell a quieter story of America, of survival, community, and simple traditions long forgotten. Today, we're going to rediscover 20 Thanksgiving breakfasts Americans ate before turkey took over, and we'll uncover the surprising, emotional histories behind each dish. Some are rustic. Some are hearty. Some might feel shockingly strange. But all of them reveal something about the families who built this country. One morning meal at a time. Let's begin with one of the earliest, simplest, and most comforting breakfast traditions in American history. Number 1. Cornmeal mush with molasses. Before America had breakfast cereals or morning pastries, millions of families started Thanksgiving with a bowl of something far more humble and far more meaningful. Cornmeal mush dates back to the earliest colonial settlements and long before that, to the indigenous tribes who cultivated maize for thousands of years. Colonists learned quickly that cornmeal was cheap, filling, and reliable through harsh New England winters. By the 1700s and 1800s, a warm bowl of mush simmered on almost every hearth on Thanksgiving morning. It was made from nothing more than ground cornmeal and water, stirred slowly until thick and creamy. When molasses, one of early America's most accessible sweeteners, was poured over the top, it transformed into a breakfast that felt warm, comforting, and just a little indulgent. For families who lived by candlelight and wood fires, breakfast wasn't about flavor, it was about survival. Cornmeal mush offered a reliable source of energy before hours of work preparing the midday Thanksgiving meal. Children ate it before feeding livestock. Adults ate it before tending fires or churning butter. It was cheap enough for the poorest households and familiar enough for the wealthiest. In many ways, it was the great equalizer of early American breakfasts. What's surprising is how easily it vanished. A dish that once nourished an entire nation simply faded away as industrialized food took over. Today, most Americans have never tasted it, and some don't even know it existed. Yet this simple bowl once symbolized warmth, stability, and the quiet start of a holiday that would later become anything but quiet. But for families needing something heartier than mush, something crispy, savory, and skillet-fried, another Thanksgiving morning favorite quickly became a tradition across the early colonies. Number 2. Fried salt pork and Johnny cakes. Before bacon sizzled its way into the American breakfast, another salty, crackling favorite filled cast-iron pans on Thanksgiving morning. Salt pork, thick slabs of heavily salted and cured fatback, was a staple in colonial pantries. Unlike fresh meats, it lasted through brutal winters, long hunts, and months at sea. For early New Englanders, salt pork wasn't a luxury, it was survival food. Paired with Johnny cakes, a fried cornmeal flatbread adopted directly from indigenous cooking traditions, this breakfast became iconic from the 1600s through the mid-1800s. Families would slice the salt pork thin, fry it until crisp, and then cook the Johnny cakes in the leftover fat, absorbing every smoky, savory flavor. Thanksgiving mornings demanded practicality. Before families stuffed turkeys or prepared pies, they needed fuel for the labor ahead. Salt pork and Johnny cakes were fast, filling, and required ingredients nearly every household already had. The meal represented the tight bond between indigenous knowledge and colonial adaptation, a food born from necessity and shared traditions. Today, few Americans have ever tasted real salt pork. Supermarkets rarely carry it, and even fewer know how to cook it. Yet, for centuries, children woke to that unmistakable smell crackling over a hearth flame, marking the unofficial start of Thanksgiving. A breakfast so woven into the fabric of early America has all but disappeared. But not every Thanksgiving morning began with frying pans and sizzling fat. Some families preferred something gentler, warmer, and surprisingly familiar, especially if pumpkins were already lining the kitchen. Let's move on to hashtag 3. Pumpkin porridge. Number 3. Pumpkin porridge. Imagine waking up on Thanksgiving morning, and instead of pumpkin pie, the first thing you tasted was a steaming bowl of pumpkin porridge. Long before pumpkin became a symbol of autumn desserts, early American households used it the way modern families use oats. Pumpkins were plentiful, easy to store, and lasted through winter. As early as the 1600s, colonists cooked pumpkin down with milk, cornmeal, or spices, creating a warm porridge eaten before any holiday preparations began. Native American tribes had long used pumpkin as a nutritious base food, and colonists eagerly adopted it. Pumpkin porridge mattered because it represented abundance in a season defined by scarcity. Fresh bread required yeast. Bacon required livestock. But pumpkin. Almost every homestead had it. On Thanksgiving morning, this porridge was comforting, hearty, and symbolic. A reminder that even in the harshest seasons, something sweet could still be shared. What's surprising is how completely this tradition vanished. Today, pumpkin is nearly always associated with dessert, even though it was once considered a breakfast essential. Pumpkin porridge, once celebrated for warmth and simplicity, faded as processed cereals and packaged goods took its place. But while pumpkin porridge warmed early households, another dish filled the air with the smell of baked apples and flaky crusts, something that blurred the line between breakfast and dessert. Next up is hashtag 4. Apple pandowdy. Number 4. Apple pandowdy. Before Thanksgiving smelled like turkey, it smelled like apples, bubbling in a skillet from a dish most Americans have never heard of today. Apple pandowdy dates back to the 18th century, when colonists relied heavily on apples for cider, vinegar, and baked dishes. The pandowdy was a rustic skillet dessert with a simple crust laid over sweetened apples, then deliberately pressed down, or dowdied, during baking. Families often ate it for breakfast, especially on holidays, because apples stored well through fall and required no special ingredients. Warm, sweet, and easy to make, apple pandowdy warmed families on cold Thanksgiving mornings long before ovens were used for elaborate feasts. It brought a sense of celebration without requiring rare spices or expensive sugar. In farming communities, pandowdy symbolized the shift from harvest season to winter rest. Today, few Americans under 50 even know this dish existed. While pies, crisps, and cobblers survived into modern cookbooks, the humble pandowdy faded away, leaving behind only a whisper of the simpler breakfasts that shaped early holiday mornings. But not every Thanksgiving breakfast was sweet. Sometimes, families turned to hearty, savory foods that stretched every last scrap from the butchering season. That brings us to hashtag 5. Scrapple and eggs. Number 5. Scrapple and eggs. To modern eaters, it might sound unusual, but for early Americans, scrapple and eggs was the ultimate Thanksgiving morning fuel. Scrapple originated with German settlers in Pennsylvania. Made from pork scraps, cornmeal, and spices, it was a resourceful dish that ensured nothing went to waste after butchering season. Early Americans formed the mixture into loaves, sliced it, and fried it to a crisp golden brown. Paired with eggs from the morning's gathering, it became a filling breakfast across the Mid-Atlantic and Appalachian regions. Thanksgiving required long hours in the kitchen and on the farm, and scrapple provided dense energy that kept families going. It was affordable, protein-packed, and easily shared with large households. In a culture where waste was unacceptable, scrapple was both food and philosophy, proof that every part of an animal could nourish a family. Today, scrapple survives only in small pockets of America, often misunderstood or dismissed. Yet for centuries, it was a sign that winter preparations were complete, and that Thanksgiving morning had officially begun. A breakfast once central to regional identity has become a forgotten artifact. But as hearty as scrapple was, some families started their holiday with something softer, sweeter, and spread generously with the flavors of the old American South. Number 6. Buttermilk biscuits with sorghum syrup. Before maple syrup ever reached most American tables, another golden sweetness flowed across warm biscuits on Thanksgiving morning. In the American South and parts of the Midwest, sorghum syrup was once more common than sugar. Families grew sorghum cane in their own fields, crushed it by hand, and boiled it down into a rich, dark syrup. Buttermilk biscuits, soft, flaky, baked in cast iron, were the perfect partner. On Thanksgiving morning, long before turkeys were carved, the scent of biscuits rising in wood stoves meant the day had officially begun. Biscuits were reliable. They didn't require yeast or long rising times. Sorghum, unlike imported sugar, was inexpensive and locally made. The combination created a breakfast that felt warm, comforting, and rooted in Southern tradition. For many families, sorghum wasn't just food, it was heritage. A taste passed from grandparents to grandchildren. Today, sorghum syrup is nearly forgotten outside of a few pockets in the South. Most Americans have never tasted it, never mind poured it over biscuits on a cold holiday morning. Yet for generations, this simple breakfast represented hearth, home, and the sweetness of a simpler life. And while biscuits offered softness and comfort, some Thanksgiving mornings called for something heartier, something baked slow and steady through the night. Our next stop. #7. Brown bread and baked beans. Number 7. Brown bread and baked beans. To many early New England families, Thanksgiving morning didn't start with something sweet. It started with a slow-baked, hearty tradition older than the holiday itself. Brown bread, usually made from a mix of wheat, rye, and cornmeal, was a staple of New England's working families. Traditionally steamed in a tin can or baked low and slow, it paired perfectly with baked beans that had simmered all night in brick ovens. This combination, deeply tied to indigenous food traditions and Puritan cooking, fed families long before Thanksgiving became a national celebration. This breakfast was more than food. It was a routine woven into weekly life. Beans provided protein. Brown bread offered energy. Together, they created a comforting meal that warmed the body before the long tasks of Thanksgiving preparation. It reflected New England's values: thriftiness, practicality, and honoring the bounty of the land. Modern Thanksgiving tables rarely acknowledge this dish, even though it was once one of the most recognizable breakfasts across early America. What we now dismiss as old-fashioned was once the culinary heartbeat of an entire region. But while New England relied on grains and beans, other parts of early America embraced a breakfast with deeper native roots: simple, buttery, and always satisfying. Let's continue with #8. Hominy and butter. Number 8. Hominy and butter. Long before cereal bowls filled American breakfast tables, another bowl, warm, buttery, and ancient, began Thanksgiving morning for thousands of families. Hominy is one of the oldest foods on the continent. Indigenous tribes created it by soaking corn kernels in an alkaline solution, allowing them to puff up, soften, and transform into something entirely new. Colonists quickly adopted hominy, valuing its long shelf life and versatility. On Thanksgiving morning, many families simply heated hominy over the hearth and stirred in butter or cream, creating a nourishing, comforting start to the day. Hominy required almost no extra ingredients, perfect for rural families who needed something quick and filling before hours of cooking. It was nutritious, mild, and adaptable, making it a breakfast for both the wealthy and the poor. Its presence on the Thanksgiving table represented a blend of cultures: indigenous tradition and colonial adaptation. Today, most Americans rarely think about hominy at all, except maybe in a can labeled for chili. Yet this simple dish was once central to daily life, a quiet reminder of the shared food history that shaped the earliest Thanksgivings. And speaking of warm, comforting breakfasts, there was another morning treat, fried hot and dusted with fall spices, that made Thanksgiving feel like a celebration. Number 9. Apple cider donuts fried in lard. Today's apple cider donuts might look familiar, but the ones early Americans ate on Thanksgiving morning were richer, crispier, and far more old-fashioned. Before vegetable oils existed, lard was the universal cooking fat. Families saved it carefully through butchering season and used it for frying special treats. Apple cider donuts, made by reducing fresh pressed cider into a concentrated syrup, were a beloved fall recipe. On Thanksgiving morning, they were fried in bubbling lard and rolled in coarse sugar or cinnamon. These donuts weren't everyday food. Frying in lard was considered a special occasion, something worth waiting for. Thanksgiving morning became synonymous with that warm scent. Cider, cloves, nutmeg, and sweet dough sizzling over an open flame. It was a once-a-year indulgence that felt like the official start of the holiday. Modern apple cider donuts, light, airy, baked in clean oil, are a gentler version of what our ancestors enjoyed. The originals were dense, rustic, and intensely flavorful. In losing the old method, we also lost the powerful sensory memory that once marked Thanksgiving morning for entire communities. But while many families favored sweets and baked goods, others embraced a more rugged, frontier-style breakfast, one tied directly to the hunt. Up next, #10. Venison sausage patties. Number 10. Venison sausage patties. Before pigs were plentiful and store-bought sausage existed, many Thanksgiving mornings started with a sizzling meat most people never consider today. On the American frontier, deer were far more common than domesticated livestock. Hunters prepared venison sausage each fall, seasoning it with sage, pepper, and salt before shaping it into patties. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, it was one of the freshest, most flavorful meats in the home. Households across the Midwest, Appalachia, and early colonies began their holiday with venison frying in cast-iron pans. Venison represented self-sufficiency. It proved the family had survived the harvest, completed the hunt, and prepared for winter. On Thanksgiving morning, it was a source of pride. Meat earned through skill, patience, and tradition. Rich in flavor and protein, it provided the strength needed for hours of cooking and chores. Today, many Americans have never tasted venison, let alone enjoyed it for breakfast. But for early families, this dish carried deep symbolism, a reminder that Thanksgiving wasn't always about abundance. Sometimes it was about resilience, resourcefulness, and making do with what the land provided. But after the hearty weight of venison, Thanksgiving breakfast often turned back to something lighter, something warm, earthy, and made on griddles across rural America. Number 11. Buckwheat pancakes with fresh churned butter. Before boxed pancake mixes and syrup bottles, Thanksgiving mornings often began with a simple, nutty stack of buckwheat pancakes and fresh, hand-churned butter. Buckwheat, though not a true cereal grain, became a staple for early American farmers because it grew well in poor soil and required little care. By the 18th and 19th centuries, many households ground the buckwheat themselves, turning it into flour for pancakes cooked over an open hearth. Freshly churned butter, produced from cream collected the day before, elevated the dish to a subtly indulgent treat that was easy to prepare for large families before the day's main feast. Buckwheat pancakes were nutritious, filling, and quick to cook, a necessity when mornings were cold and chores awaited. Families loved them for their earthy flavor and warmth, and children would gather around the stove, eagerly anticipating the pancakes dripping with soft, golden butter. The dish was practical yet comforting, embodying the rustic simplicity of early Thanksgiving mornings. Few modern Americans realize that these pancakes were once a core breakfast tradition across rural New England and Appalachia. Today, store-bought alternatives have replaced the labor-intensive preparation, and the subtle hearty taste of real buckwheat pancakes has become almost a forgotten memory. While pancakes brought warmth and familiarity, other regions preferred something more dense, hearty, and slightly sweet, made from local grains. Next is #12. Rye and Indian bread with maple cream. Number 12. Rye and Indian bread with maple cream. Before fluffy white toast and modern spreads, Thanksgiving mornings could start with a thick slice of rye or Indian bread, smothered in the sweet richness of maple cream. Rye and Indian bread, cornbread often mixed with rye or wheat, were common in colonial kitchens. They were dense, rustic, and baked in heavy pans over hearth fires. Maple cream, made by reducing pure maple syrup into a spreadable consistency, turned this humble bread into a breakfast fit for the holiday. Families often prepared the cream in advance, ensuring that the first bite of Thanksgiving morning carried a rich, warm sweetness. This breakfast reflected local resources, grains from nearby fields and maple sap tapped from family-owned trees. It was economical, filling, and versatile, offering a subtle sweetness without relying on imported sugar. The pairing represented both practicality and indulgence, a careful balance of sustenance and celebration. Today, few Americans know about this tradition. The idea of maple cream on hearty breads has largely been replaced by modern spreads. Yet for centuries, it was a morning ritual that made Thanksgiving feel complete, bridging the gap between nourishment and delight. But while some households enjoyed sweetened breads, others favored fried vegetables, cooked slowly to intensify their flavors. Next up, #13. Fried potatoes and onions in goose fat. Number 13. Fried potatoes and onions in goose fat. Before buttered hash browns or skillet fried potatoes became commonplace, Thanksgiving mornings often featured a savory, rich dish of potatoes and onions fried in goose fat. Geese were a common farm animal in early America, providing both meat and fat. Farmers would render the fat for cooking, giving vegetables an incomparable depth of flavor. Potatoes, introduced from Europe, were often sliced and fried with onions in this rich fat, producing a dish that was both hearty and aromatic. On cold November mornings, the sizzling pan filled kitchens with warmth and the unmistakable scent of home. This breakfast was practical yet luxurious, inexpensive, filling, and perfect for energizing the family before a long day of preparations. The combination of crisp potatoes and caramelized onions in goose fat created flavors that modern substitutes, like vegetable oil, cannot replicate, making it a comfort dish rooted in both necessity and celebration. Today, goose fat is rare in American kitchens, and few families prepare potatoes this way for Thanksgiving. The dish has faded from collective memory, yet for generations, it marked the true start of a holiday steeped in tradition, warmth, and flavor. After savory mornings like this, simpler, quick-cooked breakfasts also had their place. Dishes that reminded families of old colonial habits. Next is #14. Hasty pudding. Number 14. Hasty pudding. The name might sound rushed, but hasty pudding was a deliberate, comforting way to start Thanksgiving morning centuries ago. Hasty pudding dates back to the early 1600s and was brought to America by English settlers. Made by boiling cornmeal in water or milk, it was a quick and inexpensive dish that provided warmth and sustenance. Families often sweetened it with molasses or flavored it with spices, serving it hot from the hearth before tackling the day's harvest and feast preparations. This breakfast represented practicality and adaptation. Cornmeal was abundant, inexpensive, and easy to store. Hasty pudding was versatile. It could be a sweet dish or a savory one, filling and reliable. It offered nourishment for adults and children alike, serving as a symbol of early American resilience and simplicity. Today, hasty pudding is mostly relegated to historical cookbooks or ceremonial events. Few remember that it was once a cornerstone of the Thanksgiving morning routine, a humble dish that fueled the work, family time, and celebration that followed. While hasty pudding offered warmth and comfort, other families began the day with tart, portable treats, perfect for busy hands and long mornings. Next up, #15. Cranberry water bread. Number 15. Cranberry water bread. Before cranberry sauce was a staple, Thanksgiving mornings sometimes began with a simple, tart bread made from the native berries themselves. Cranberry water bread involved soaking native cranberries, mixing them into a simple flour-based dough, and baking it over the hearth or in early ovens. The bread was lightly sweetened, moist and tangy, making it a refreshing contrast to heavier breakfast foods like pork, mush, or fried cakes. It was practical for early settlers, as cranberries were abundant in northeastern marshes and easy to preserve. This bread bridged indigenous knowledge and colonial adaptation. It provided a burst of flavor and a reminder of local harvests at a time when imported ingredients were scarce. Families loved it for its tartness, its portability, and its connection to the land. Today, cranberry water bread is virtually forgotten, overshadowed by cranberry sauce or modern sweetbreads. Yet for centuries, it was a subtle, nourishing, and festive way to begin Thanksgiving, embodying both tradition and resourcefulness. From tart breads to rich, savory proteins, the next breakfast on our list was a true taste of the frontier. Number 16. Sausage-stuffed breakfast oysters. Before most Americans even thought of seafood for Thanksgiving, some coastal families started their mornings with oysters, stuffed and sizzling with savory sausage. In the 17th and 18th centuries, oysters were abundant along the eastern seaboard. Coastal settlers combined freshly shucked oysters with seasoned pork sausage, breadcrumbs, and herbs, creating a breakfast that was hearty, flavorful, and highly local. Oysters were cheap and readily available, making them a perfect protein to start the long holiday day. This breakfast showcased regional ingenuity. Families embraced what was nearby, transforming humble ingredients into a celebratory dish. The combination of tender oysters and savory sausage fueled early risers for hours of cooking, cleaning, and family gatherings, a luxury for some, a necessity for many. Today, oysters are rarely seen on Thanksgiving breakfast tables. Most Americans have never tasted this combination, and it survives mostly in historic cookbooks. Yet for early settlers, it was a symbol of coastal abundance and resourcefulness. As coastal families embraced seafood, inland families often relied on fruits that could be stored and baked ahead of time. Number 17. Dried apple hand pies. Portable, sweet, and perfectly portioned dried apple hand pies were the ultimate Thanksgiving morning treat for working families. Before refrigeration, apples were dried to preserve them through the winter. Families combined dried apple slices with spices, sugar, and occasionally a bit of butter, encasing the mixture in simple pastry. Hand pies were baked ahead of time or early in the morning, making them easy to carry for children helping in the fields or to enjoy while preparing the main feast. These pies were practical and festive. They brought sweetness to cold mornings and offered convenience without sacrificing flavor. Families could enjoy a portable treat, ensuring no one began the day hungry, a simple solution in a time when every morsel counted. Today, most Americans only associate apples with pie, cider, or raw snacks. Few realize these hand pies were once a Thanksgiving staple, connecting family, labor, and harvest in every bite. From sweet hand pies, some families turn to a comforting, almost therapeutic dish, one so simple it's hard to imagine it once sustained entire households. Number 18. Hot milk toast. Before the age of instant oatmeal or cereal, families on Thanksgiving mornings often sought solace in a warm bowl of hot milk toast. Hot milk toast was a common breakfast across 19th century America. Thick slices of stale bread were soaked in heated milk, sometimes sweetened with sugar or flavored with a bit of nutmeg. It was a dish of humility and comfort, often prepared for children or the elderly who needed warmth and sustenance before the busy holiday began. The dish was simple, economical, and nourishing. It provided warmth on cold November mornings and reminded families of home, hearth, and tradition. Its soft, creamy texture was comforting, creating a quiet pause before the bustle of Thanksgiving cooking. Today, hot milk toast is nearly invisible on breakfast tables. Its gentle simplicity has been replaced by packaged cereals and pastries, yet for generations, it represented care, comfort, and the quiet start to a holiday rooted in gratitude. While milk toast offered softness, Southern kitchens often favored a slightly more robust, sweet, and fried breakfast to kick off the holiday. Number 19. Sweet potato hoe cakes. Before pumpkin pie dominated desserts, some Southern families began Thanksgiving with sweet, golden sweet potato cakes, fried to perfection. Sweet potatoes, native to the Americas, were a staple of Southern cuisine. Families mashed them with a bit of sugar or molasses, formed them into small patties, and fried them on griddles. Called hoe cakes for their rustic preparation, these cakes were hearty, naturally sweet, and quick to prepare for a busy holiday morning. Sweet potato hoe cakes were beloved for their taste, warmth, and connection to the land. They were portable, easy to make in large batches, and full of nutrients. For Southern families, they marked the transition from harvest to holiday, providing comfort and indulgence in equal measure. Few modern Americans have tasted authentic hoe cakes. Today's sweet potato pancakes or fries are echoes, not the original. Yet these cakes once brought families together, signaling that Thanksgiving had begun in earnest. And finally, for families seeking a breakfast that could use leftovers while still feeling festive, one humble dish stood out. Number 20. Morning hearth stew. The ultimate leftover breakfast, morning hearth stew transformed simple ingredients into a hearty start to Thanksgiving. Hearth stews were common across early America. Leftover vegetables, grains, and meats were simmered overnight in a large pot over the fire. By Thanksgiving morning, the stew was infused with flavor, providing warmth and nourishment to start the holiday before the main feast began. It reflected a practical mindset. Nothing went to waste, and every meal was a chance to make the most of available resources. Morning hearth stew was filling, easy, and versatile. It allowed families to stretch limited ingredients while creating a communal dish that everyone could enjoy together. It embodied the spirit of thrift, sustainability, and shared labor that defined early American holidays. Today, the idea of a savory stew for breakfast seems unusual, yet for centuries, it was a Thanksgiving morning staple. Modern traditions have replaced it with cereals, pastries, or coffee. But hearth stew reminds us of a time when every meal carried history, care, and ingenuity. Smooth transition/outro lead-in. These 20 breakfasts, long before turkey claimed the spotlight, tell a story of resilience, creativity, and regional diversity. They remind us that Thanksgiving was never just about the feast. It was about family, community, and making the most of what the land provided. As we've seen, early Thanksgiving mornings were a tapestry of flavors, textures, and traditions, far more varied and surprising than the modern table suggests. From cornmeal mush to morning hearth stew, these breakfasts carried warmth, history, and the spirit of gratitude long before turkey took center stage. By remembering these meals, we connect with the ingenuity, resourcefulness, and tastes of those who shaped America. Perhaps one day, we might bring a few of these forgotten breakfasts back into our own holiday traditions, reconnecting with a simpler, yet profoundly meaningful past. If you enjoyed this journey through forgotten flavors and historical mornings, subscribe to the World Tapestry. We'll continue exploring the hidden stories, recipes, and traditions that make America, and its food, truly unforgettable.